Picture a courtroom, not the kind you know, with fluorescent lights and men in suits shuffling papers. A Roman courtroom, stone floors, torches. A magistrate seated high on a marble bench, robes the color of dried blood, and a woman standing at the back of the room waiting to speak. She has seen something. She knows something. Her testimony could change everything. But the magistrate does not look at her. He does not call her name, because under Roman law and under the legal codes that governed Jewish courts in the first century, her testimony does not count. She cannot speak in a formal proceeding. She is not a valid witness. She is, legally speaking, invisible. Hold that thought, because here is what this video is actually about. This is not a story about gender politics. This is not a story about feminism or any modern debate. This is not a story about culture wars dressed up in Bible verses. This is a story about a God who kept stopping for the people everyone else walked past. And across 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there is a pattern hiding in plain sight. Jesus, the Son of God, the rabbi from Galilee, the man who healed the blind and raised the dead, kept stopping for women, specifically for women, in a world that had decided they were not worth stopping for. We are going to walk through every major encounter. We are going to look at what he said, what he did, and, most importantly, what each moment cost him in terms of the social and religious expectations of his day. And at the end of this video, I want you to sit with one detail, one fact about the most important morning in human history, because when you understand what Jesus did on that morning and who he chose to tell first, everything we are about to cover will land differently. Stay with me. Let's begin with a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. You need to understand what that means in the ancient world. Under Levitical law, specifically in the book of Leviticus, chapters 15 and 17, a woman with a hemorrhage was considered ritually unclean, not sinful, not evil, but unclean. And that distinction, while theological in origin, had devastating practical consequences. She could not enter the temple courts. She could not touch another person without making them unclean. She could not sit on furniture in someone else's home without rendering it unclean. She was, in the most literal sense, untouchable. And she had been untouchable for 12 years. We are not told her name. Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, gives us the most detailed account. She has spent everything she had on physicians. Mark says she has suffered greatly. She has gotten worse, not better. And she has heard about Jesus. So she moves through the crowd toward him. You have to picture this crowd. Jesus is surrounded, pressed in from every side, because he is on his way to do something urgent. A synagogue leader named Jairus has just fallen at his feet, begging him to come to his dying daughter. Jesus is moving. The crowd is moving. And this woman edges closer, closer, until she can reach out and touch the fringe of his garment. The Greek word for what happens next is asterisk, yaomai asterisk. It means to heal, but it carries the sense of being made whole, not just the symptom removed, the entire person restored. She feels it immediately. The bleeding stops. She knows in her body that something has changed. And then Jesus stops. He says, "Who touched me?" His disciples are baffled. They say essentially, "Rabbi, there are people pressing in on you from every direction. What do you mean, who touched you?" But he keeps looking, and the woman, terrified, the text says she came in fear and trembling, falls at his feet and tells him everything, the whole truth, 12 years of it. Here's what Jesus does not say. He does not say, "You made me unclean." He does not say, "You should not have done that in public." He does not say, Go see the priest first. He says, daughter. One word. And it is the only time in all four Gospels that Jesus addresses a woman with that word. Not woman, not her name, daughter. Which means, in that moment, he is claiming her as family. He is pulling her in, not pushing her out. Daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Pay attention to this. The crowd around them includes religious leaders, men who would have known the law, who would have known she was unclean, who would have known that touching her or being touched by her carried ritual consequences. Jesus does not apologize for any of it. He does not lower his voice. He says it clearly, publicly, in front of everyone. He stopped in the middle of an urgent errand. For a woman the world had declared untouchable, and then he kept walking. The next stop happens in a town called Nain. Luke chapter 7. Jesus is traveling with his disciples and a large crowd following behind him. And as they approach the city gate, another crowd is coming out. A funeral procession. The one being carried is a young man, and his mother walks beside the bier. A widow, the text says. The only detail Luke gives us about her is that this son was her only one. You need to understand the stakes here. In first century Jewish culture, a widow without a son had no legal protector, no financial inheritance, no one to speak for her in civic life. Her son was not just her child. He was her future, her security, her survival, and he is dead. Luke writes that when Jesus saw her, he had compassion on her. The Greek word is asterisk, splashnizomai asterisk. It refers to the visceral, gut-level movement of emotion, not polite sympathy, something that moved through his body. He walks to the bier, he touches it, and the bearers stop. And he says, young man, I say to you, arise. The dead man sits up and begins to speak, and Jesus gives him to his mother. That last sentence is worth reading slowly. He gives him to his mother, not to the disciples, not to the crowd. The first recipient of this miracle is a nameless widow standing at her lowest moment in a town nobody important had ever visited. Fear gave way to wonder. Luke says the people were seized with it. They said, a great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. They were right, but they did not know how fully they were right. Here's what most people miss. There is one other story in the Old Testament that mirrors this moment almost exactly. The prophet Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17. He raises a widow's son and gives him back to his mother. The parallel is not accidental. Luke is telling you something. He is saying, this is not just a miracle. This is a statement about who Jesus is and what the arrival of God looks like in human history. It looks like stopping at a widow's funeral procession. Now we travel north, out of Jewish territory entirely, into Samaria. John chapter 4. Jesus is sitting at a well, Jacob's well, near the ancient city of Shechem, at noon. His disciples have gone into town to buy food, and a woman comes to draw water. This detail matters more than it might seem. Women in that culture typically came to the well in the morning or evening, in groups, in the cool part of the day. A woman arriving alone at noon was avoiding people. We will understand why shortly. Jesus asks her for water. She is astonished, not just because a Jewish man is speaking to a Samaritan woman, though that alone would have been remarkable, since devout Jews avoided Samaritans entirely, going miles out of their way to bypass Samaritan territory. She is astonished because he is speaking to her, a woman, alone, at a public well. And then the conversation goes somewhere unexpected. He tells her that if she knew who was asking, she would ask him for water, and he would give her living water, water that becomes a spring welling up to eternal life. The Greek term is zoe aionios, eternal life. This is the first time in John's gospel that Jesus offers eternal life explicitly to another person. And he offers it to a Samaritan woman with a complicated personal history. Because when she says she has no husband, he tells her she has had 5 husbands, and the man she is with now is not her husband. He is not condemning her. The text does not indicate that. He is simply showing her that he sees her fully, completely, all of it, and he is still offering the water. She runs back to her village. She tells everyone, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Christ?" Here's the part nobody tells you. This woman, unnamed, Samaritan, socially marginalized, becomes the first evangelist in John's gospel. Jesus had not yet sent out the 12 on their mission. He had not yet given his disciples the Great Commission. But this woman runs back to her town and tells everyone. And the text says that many Samaritans believed in him because of her word. The word she uses in Greek is mimaturkin. She gave testimony. She witnessed. She bore witness. Hold that word. We are coming back to it. If you are finding this helpful, do me a favor right now. Subscribe if you have not already. Hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. And if you know someone who needs to hear about a God who stops for the overlooked, share this video with them. We are about halfway through, and what is coming in the second half is the most important part of this story. Now let's talk about Mary of Bethany, 3 miles east of Jerusalem, a small village called Bethany, and a family Jesus loved, 2 sisters and a brother, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Luke chapter 10 gives us the first picture. Jesus is in their home. Martha is doing what any good host in that culture would do, working, preparing food, managing the household, doing what was expected of a woman receiving a guest. And Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to him teach. Martha notices, and she says to Jesus, and there is an edge in it, you can hear it, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me." What Jesus says next was, in that cultural moment, genuinely radical. "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, and it will not be taken away from her." Sit in the significance of that. In first century Jewish culture, religious education was the domain of men. Women were not typically included in Torah study. A rabbi's disciples, his asterisk, Talmidim asterisk, were men. The act of sitting at a teacher's feet was a formal posture of discipleship. And Jesus defends Mary's right to sit there. He does not just allow it. He says she has chosen the good portion, the better part. There is a second moment involving Mary of Bethany that is even more striking. John chapter 12, 6 days before the Passover, before the crucifixion, Lazarus is there, alive, just raised from the dead. Martha is serving, and Mary takes a pound of expensive ointment, pure nard, John tells us, and she anoints Jesus' feet and wipes them with her hair. Judas objects immediately. He says the perfume was worth 300 denarii. That's nearly a year's wages for a common laborer. He says it should have been sold and given to the poor. Jesus responds, "Leave her alone. She has kept it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." He is saying she understood something the disciples had not yet grasped. She anointed him for burial before anyone else had accepted that he was going to die. In that room, full of men who would later argue about who would be greatest in the kingdom, a woman was the one who saw clearly what was coming. and gave everything she had for it. Now we go to the border country, the edges of Israel, where a Gentile mother is waiting. Matthew chapter 15. A Canaanite woman, Mark calls her Syrophoenician, comes to Jesus shouting. Her daughter is possessed by a demon. She is calling him Lord, Son of David. She has no right to that title by Jewish tradition. She is not a Jew. She is not in the covenant, but she is screaming it anyway because her daughter is suffering. The disciples urge Jesus to send her away. She is causing a scene. Jesus says something that has troubled readers for centuries. He says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And then, it sounds harsh. He says it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Dogs was a term Jews sometimes used for Gentiles. And Jesus uses it here, directly. But watch what happens. The woman does not back down. She says, yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. She takes his word. She uses his metaphor. She refuses to be dismissed. And Jesus says, and the Greek word here is important, he says she has great asterisk, pistis asterisk, great faith. He uses the word great only twice in the Gospels when describing someone's faith. The centurion in Matthew chapter 8, whose servant he healed, and this Canaanite woman, a Roman soldier and a Gentile mother, both outsiders, both commended above the insiders for their faith. The daughter is healed that very hour. Now, watch what happens next, because Matthew chapter 15 does not end there. After this encounter with the Syrophoenician woman, Jesus goes to the Sea of Galilee, and crowds come to him, bringing lame people, blind people, people who cannot speak, and he heals them all. And the crowds marveled and glorified the God of Israel. The God of Israel, glorified by Gentile crowds, right after a Gentile woman refused to take no for an answer. We need to go to the temple courts now. Early morning, Jerusalem. John chapter 8. Jesus has been teaching in the temple, and the scribes and Pharisees bring a woman to him. They throw her, that is the sense of the Greek, into the middle of the crowd, and they say she has been caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses, they say, commands that she be stoned. They are not actually interested in the law. They are interested in trapping Jesus. If he says stone her, he loses his reputation as a teacher of mercy. If he says release her, he can be accused of contradicting Moses. Jesus bends down and writes in the dust with his finger. What he writes, we are never told. That silence is intentional. Scholars have speculated for centuries. The text does not tell us. What the text does tell us is that when they keep pressing him, he straightens up and says, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And then he bends back down and writes again. One by one, beginning with the oldest, they leave. You want to sit with that image. A crowd assembling to execute a woman, the rocks already in their hands, the energy of a mob in their chests, and it dissolves quietly, one man at a time, until there is no one left except Jesus and the woman still standing in the dust. He straightens up. He says, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She says, no one, Lord. And he says, neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more. He does not minimize what she has done. The go and sin no more is real, but he refuses to be the instrument of her destruction. He sends her away alive. In a society where she had just been a second away from execution, he gives her back her life, quietly, with no audience left to perform for. And he is worth noticing. He did not do that for the crowd. The crowd was gone. He did it because she was still standing there. There is one more woman before we get to the most important one. Luke chapter 13, a Sabbath day in a synagogue. There is a woman there who has been bent over for 18 years. She cannot stand upright. Luke says she has a spirit of infirmity. Something has been crushing her down for nearly 2 decades, and she cannot lift her head to see the sky. She has not come to Jesus asking for healing. The text does not say she sought him out. She is simply there, in the synagogue, where she has probably been every Sabbath of her adult life, bent toward the floor. Jesus sees her. He calls her to him. He lays his hands on her and says, "Woman, you are freed from your disability." And immediately she straightens up. The ruler of the synagogue is indignant. "You can heal on any of the 6 other days," he says, "not on the Sabbath." Jesus calls him a hypocrite. He says, "Does not every one of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or your donkey and lead it to water? You do that for your animals. This woman," he calls her a daughter of Abraham, "has been bound by Satan for 18 years. Was it not necessary that she be freed on the Sabbath day?" Daughter of Abraham. That is the only time in all the Gospels that Jesus uses that phrase for a woman. The phrase son of Abraham was a title of honor. It meant you were a full heir of the covenant, a true member of the people of God. Jesus takes that honor and gives it to a bent-over woman who had not asked for anything. She straightened up, and when she straightened up, she began praising God. Now we come back to the beginning. The Roman courtroom, the woman who cannot testify, the testimony that does not count. We are at the tomb now, Sunday morning, before dawn. Everything has happened. The arrest, the trials, the beatings, the crucifixion, the stone rolled across the entrance to a tomb. 3 days. The disciples scattered, hiding, grieving, terrified behind locked doors in Jerusalem. And it is a woman who goes first. John chapter 20. Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb while it is still dark. She sees the stone has been moved. She runs back and tells Peter and John. They run to the tomb, see the burial cloths lying there, and then, John writes this with a kind of quiet devastation, they go back to their homes. But Mary stands outside the tomb, weeping. She stoops and looks in. She sees 2 angels. They ask her why she is crying. She says they have taken away her Lord, and she does not know where they have laid him. She turns around. A man is standing there. She thinks it is the gardener. She asks him if he knows where they have taken the body. And then he says her name. Mary, one word. And in that word, everything. Because she recognizes him not by sight, but by the sound of her name in his voice. This is where the open loop closes. Remember the Roman courtroom? The woman who cannot testify? The legal system that declared her testimony worthless? Jesus, risen from the dead, the most consequential fact in human history, chooses a woman as the first witness, the first person to hear the news, the first person to see him, the first person to be sent. He says to her, "Go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Go, tell, witness, testify. The Greek word is poreuthēti, go. It is the same word he will use in the Great Commission when he says, go into all the world. He uses it first here with Mary Magdalene. Before the disciples get the commission, a woman gets the commission. The church fathers understood this. Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the early 4th century, recorded how the testimony of the women at the tomb was considered foundational, not despite being women, but because the fact that they went first and that they told the truth when everyone else was hiding was itself remarkable. Augustine called Mary Magdalene *apostola apostolorum *, the apostle to the apostles, the one sent to the ones who would be sent. Here's the part nobody tells you. Under Roman law, under Jewish legal code, her testimony would not hold up in court. It would be thrown out. It would not count. And Jesus chose her anyway. He did not choose Peter, who had denied him 3 times and was hiding. He did not choose John, the beloved disciple. He chose the woman who had stayed, who had stood at the foot of the cross when the men ran, who had gone to the tomb in the dark. There is a moment you have probably had. Maybe you have had it recently when you felt invisible in a room, when you felt like your voice did not carry, like no one was going to stop for you, like the world had already decided you were not worth the attention. You kept moving through your life, bleeding quietly, bent toward the floor, arriving at wells alone at noon. Jesus has a pattern. He stops. He stopped for the bleeding woman. He stopped for the widow at the funeral. He stopped for the Samaritan woman alone at the well. He stopped for Mary of Bethany sitting in the wrong place. He stopped for the woman thrown into the dust. He stopped for the bent-over woman who had not even asked. He stopped for Mary Magdalene crying in a garden at dawn. He will stop for you. The question is whether you can hear your name in his voice the way Mary did. Through the sound of it, recognize everything. Three things to take with you. First, Jesus operated on a completely different value system than his world. In a culture that had legal, religious, and social infrastructure designed to make certain people invisible, Jesus did not work around that system quietly. He challenged it openly, publicly, and repeatedly. That is not an accident. That is a pattern. And patterns in the Gospels are never accidental. Second, every one of these women responded. The bleeding woman fell at his feet and told him the truth. The Samaritan woman ran back to her village. Mary of Bethany poured out everything she had. Mary Magdalene stayed when everyone else left. The response to being seen, when you have lived a long time being unseen, is not mild. It is total. It is everything you have. If you have ever experienced that kind of seeing from God, you know what I mean. You do not respond in half measures. Third, and this is the one I want you to carry. The most important testimony in the history of the world was given by a woman the legal system had already decided could not testify. Jesus did not make a mistake in that choice. He did not pick Mary Magdalene by accident or in the absence of a better option or because no one else was around. He picked her deliberately, the way he does everything deliberately. He was saying something about who gets to speak, about whose testimony counts, about what he thinks of the systems that decide some voices do not matter. He said it with his first resurrection appearance. He said it with a name spoken at dawn in a garden, and the word has been traveling ever since. Now, one question for you before you go. Of all the women we covered today, which one stayed with you the most? Was it the bleeding woman who touched the hem of his garment? The widow of Nain standing at her son's funeral? Mary Magdalene hearing her name in the dark? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this video meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear about a God who stops. That is the best thing you can do for this channel. We will see you in the next one.